Black Music Month Minutes.
We reject the ideology of globalism, and we embrace the doctrine of patriotism.
Not only will this tax plan pay for itself, but it will pay down debt.
There are moral and legal obligation questions that I think we'll have to wrestle with as a society.
When we as people go wobbly on the truth, we go wobbly on America.
All you have to do is look at the numbers, look at what we've done.
And this is all in the beginning.
From 100.9 FM WXIR, this is Evidence of Design, and I'm your host, Jason Taylor. Evidence of Design is a live talk show about the political economy. We critique income and wealth inequality and support democratic values. Thank you for listening, and welcome. Good morning, everyone. On this Saturday, June 8th, 2019, you're listening to Evidence of Design on 100.9 FM WXIR. No matter how we're catching you this morning, whether you're just getting in your car on a morning drive and tuning in, or if you're listening online at 1009 WXIR.com, or if you're listening anywhere around the world on the TuneIn app, we really appreciate sharing this time with you. Maybe we just have your attention for a few minutes until you reach your destination, or if you'll join us for the whole hour, we'd really like that. Because on today's show, for the next hour, we'll be talking about income and wealth inequality in the United States. That is one of the main focal points of this show of Evidence of Design. We critique income and wealth inequality, and we try to wonder, is there a lot of inequality out there? Why is there inequality if there is? And then what does that mean for us as a society? The assumption is that a lot of people are uncomfortable talking about their own money. They're uncomfortable talking about finances. And the reason for that is because the society is structured that way, such that it is taboo to talk about these things, because those in power and those who control the means of production don't want you to talk about it. They don't want you to know how much your coworkers make. They don't want you to know how much really wealthy people make. And the idea is that we don't talk about it. And we live in just like there's a colorblind society, we live in a class-blind society. So in this show, we try to break apart that myth of a class-blind society. We investigate to what extent is inequality out there and what do we do about it. So we do hope that you'll join us throughout the hour. There are plenty of ways that you can participate, such as by calling in. We are live for you today on 585-219-8889. You can also email us radioeod@gmail.com and find us on Facebook at Twitter at Radio EOD. I should also probably introduce who you're hearing this hour. And the voice right now, I'm Jason Taylor, the host of Evidence of Design. Thanks again for tuning in. But we're also joined by our good friends and co-hosts, Matt Treadwell.
Hi.
And Mary Lawrence.
Hello.
So again, it's really special here at 100.9 FM WXIR that this is live radio, live grassroots radio. And if you tune in to 95% of the other channels on the dial there, you're not going to have the opportunity to call in and have your voice be heard to folks in the community. So again, 585-219-8889, a real special resource and gem that we have here in the community. And join us as we talk about income and wealth inequality. There are a lot of new statistics that have just come out in the past months or so that show the extent to which there's income inequality in the U.S. and the extent to which there's wealth inequality. And my assumption is that those statistics will surprise you. But we won't just be talking about numbers. We'll be talking about what do they mean? What's behind the numbers? Because I think it's quite shocking. You ready to take it away this hour?
Oh, yeah.
Let's do it.
Evan finds The Third Room by Krungbin.
And this is Evidence of Design on 100.9 FM WXIR. We're a little raspy this morning because we had a fairly late night last night. Matt, do you want to kind of share what went down?
I played a show with this band, Anamon, that I've recently joined. And Jason and Mary came out to see me play. It was very sweet of them.
So Matt's usually running on about 4 hours of sleep for the show, and now we're kind of running on sub 2. So
now we're all running on less than usual.
Kind of ears are ringing and voice is sore, but it's pretty good. So folks who've listened for a while know that Matt's a musician, and if I dare say so myself, is quite talented.
We were at Matt Treadwell's Anamon at Lux Lounge last night.
Good stuff.
My face was everywhere.
Still probably is.
So, a little raspy. We'll take it this morning. So again, folks, thanks for tuning in. Let's talk about income and wealth inequality in the United States. We've had plenty of past shows about this. We've talked about neoliberalism. We've talked about kind of a theory of where inequality comes from. We've talked about some of the statistics surrounding it. Like I mentioned at the start of the hour, there are a number of new statistics out that kind of really highlight the extent to which there's income and wealth inequality, and it is quite surprising. So Matt, Mary, listeners, I'll turn it over to you and really wonder, do you notice different levels of income in your community? Like when you're going about your day, do you notice disparities in income or wealth?
In what way?
Does anything jump out to you when you're going about, do you ever consciously think, what I'm seeing right now is perhaps due to economic disparity?
I mean, yeah, I think about that quite a bit. Just when getting around during my day, I don't know, if you're going from certain parts, obviously we live in Rochester, and if you go from certain parts of the city, there's differences in the way that homes look, the way that the streets are attended to, the way that people are getting around, and I think a lot of that has to do with the means that people have to do those things.
Do you have any examples, Mary? Not to call out any specific neighborhood or block or whatnot, but concretely, do you have any places where you're looking the homes here seem to be different than the homes over there, or something like that?
I can't think of the street names right now, to be honest. Mm-hmm. I know I would. I guess the first thing that popped into my mind this morning was on our way here, we were kind of deciding which way to go on the way to the station, and it was okay, we could go down Monroe Ave or East Ave, and I was oh man, I don't want to go down Monroe Ave because the street is so bad. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if that necessarily has anything to do with the income of that street, Monroe versus East Avenue. I don't know how the taxes differ, so I can't really speak to that.
Yeah.
That was just the first thing that came to mind.
Mm-hmm. One place that I always think about is at the intersection of Culver and Atlantic, where Sticky Lips used to be and where East High School is, and there's a gas station there. So if you're at Culver and Atlantic, it looks very different than the intersection of Culver and University or Culver and East Main, right? And that's 2 blocks away from each other. And it's just really astounding when you go down Culver Road how much things change, and things simply look different. Mm-hmm. And so the point I'm getting at with this is just our society reflects differences in income and wealth in a lot of different ways. And one of the most common ways that people talk about is homes, like you mentioned, Mary, where if you're driving around and oh wow, that home looks nice because it's either big or has a large lawn or it's well taken care of and things like that. And there's other places where you look at a home and it's wow, there's broken windows and there's probably a lot of families living in it, or these sort of stereotypes that we have around income and wealth. But what's really important is that when you talk about inequality is that it's behind so many more things than possessions. And that's where kind of the devil's in the details when we talk about this, because it's really hard to see power. And that's fundamentally what economic inequality is about, just like racial inequality, is that it comes to people's either possession or lack thereof power. So people who might live in a nice house, can have a nice house, but they might not have a lot of money because they have a lot of debt, or they're taking care of kids, or they have medical bills, or something like that. So what's immeasurable is sort of where that money goes and to what extent it's able to influence power. Does that make sense?
I think so. I guess that just makes me wonder what, I think some of the stuff that we're going into gauges the income that people make. And I guess with what you're just saying, income may not actually have as much of an impact on equality as we think.
Yeah, so it might not if you think that everyone makes about the same amount of income.
Yeah,
but so let's share some of the statistics out there. So there are different ways to measure inequality, and if you want to measure income, that's a new way that people are able to do so. Mainly because of, like, in 1916, the federal government passed the 16th Amendment, which was the federal income tax. And so that's like a big deal, you know, the federal government's like, great, now we can tax incomes because we can raise money for roads, bridges, and schools, things like that. But, well, maybe not schools because it's not a federal thing, but what it also enabled people to do is to measure how much money people make in the entire country. Because before that, there was no means to do so. And so if you are able to measure how much every single individual makes an entire year, because by law they have to file a federal income tax, then you have this huge data source to look at over time to see how much money are different people making. And so the U.S. Census Bureau is one of the organizations that houses this information. And if you Google, like, U.S. Census Bureau income and poverty or something, you know, the first link will pop up. And there's tons of tables and charts and this and that shows different things about our economic indicators. One that's really interesting and important, I think, is something called the income distribution measure. And that basically shows, according to 20 different sectors of the population, how much money different sectors of the population makes. So in this measurement, there's something called a quintile. And that's a really fancy word for saying divide something into 5 equal parts. So for those of you...
Or a fifth, if you will.
Yep, a fifth, right, 1/5. So for those who remember... Yes, exactly. For those who remember high school math or middle school math, you'll find the mean, median, and mode. If you find the median of something, you're finding something in the middle, like when you're driving down a road and there's a median, you don't cross the median. So a median divides things into 2 equal parts. A quintile divides things into 5 equal parts. And so if you plot every single American on a number line and how much money they make in a year, then you divide that by 5, and then you can have 5 equal parts of all Americans. So the bottom 20% of income earners, they take in 3.1% of all of the total income in the United States in a year. 3.1%. The bottom 20%. So
it's not very much.
That's not very much. The next 20% of income earners, they take in 8.3% of all of the income. The so-called, you could argue, the so-called middle class, those right in the middle 40 to 60% of income earners in the United States, they take in 14% of all of the nation's income. The next highest, the second highest income earners, they take in 23%. And last but not least, the wealthiest 20% of Americans take in 52% of all the nation's income. So just for the sake of numbers and radio, because they don't work well together, if we take out everything in the middle and we look at the lowest income earners and the highest income earners, the lowest 20% of income earners in the United States take in 3.1% of all of the income, and the highest 20% of income earners take in 52% of all of the income.
In the United States.
In the United States.
What do those percentages mean, though?
So if you add up all of the money that people make via income in the U.S., the top 20% of income earners make over half of all of the money that people make because of income.
Yeah, I think that's not quite what I was asking. I'm thinking more like in terms of okay, what is 3.1% of the income? Like, how much money is one of those people taking home every year, for example?
That's a great question. And so there are different ways of measuring that. For example, the Tax Policy Center or the U.S. Census Bureau provides different sources of data on that, but they're relatively similar. So if you're in the bottom 20% of income earners, according to the Tax Policy Center in 2015, you make less than $23,000 a year.
Is that just for one person or for an entire household?
It says household income, the statistic.
So that would be like combined if there were more than one working adult.
To my knowledge, yeah, household income. So if your household income is less than $23,000 a year, you're, according to the statistic, in the lowest quintile, meaning you represent a portion of the population that only takes in 3.1% of all of the income. If you want to be in the highest quintile, right, if you want to be one of those folks who takes in 52% of all the nation's income, then you have to make more than, or your household income has to be more than $112,000 a year. And so there is, what this means is that it's not just that different people make different amounts of money, it's that select groups of people make tons of money and select groups of people don't make a ton of money. I think if you graph this and you see like 3.1% all the way up to 52%, it's very different.
I just think that, it's so difficult to convey over the air how this skyrockets, the amount of money that people are making as you go up further and further. Not even just, the top 5%. If you look at the top 1% of people, it's an obscene amount of money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really is quite astounding. And so, I hope that people don't sort of tune out all this stuff, because I'm doing some research right now. I'm asking young people their perceptions of income and wealth inequality. And it's so fascinating to talk to people about this, because people's perceptions, I'm finding, are way off. And not because, I'm not saying that anything negatively about them or people at large, but I just think we lack an understanding in our everyday sort of vocabulary to understand the extent to which there's income and wealth inequality in the United States. If you ask someone, how much money does the bottom 20% of Americans make? I'm not sure people would tell you 3% or even be able to wrap their minds around that. Or what separates someone from lower class and middle class? A fairly simple question, right? How can you tell if you're lower class? How can you tell if you're middle class? You get widely different answers. And I think what most people would tell you, it's if I'm not homeless, I'm not poor.
Is that what you've been experiencing as you've been asking people that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that goes back to something that you sort of touched on at the start of the show, Jason, where it's going back to the idea of power and money. I think one of the real signs of power is the ability to mask that power. It's invisibility. It's ignorance. I always recall. I think this was 2 years ago when there was that headline about how someone had unmoored Betsy DeVos's yacht, and the subline to that headline was, "It's one of 9 that she owns," and I was astounded by that, and I think that most of us would be astounded if we were able to see a more intimate sort of portrait or perspective on what it is like to be one of these 1%ers.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really powerful too. And where this conversation inevitably goes is so what's the point, right? People should make different amounts of money because they either work harder or they do different things that are more useful to society or whatever, and that's a very long conversation we can have. But I think fundamentally what it gets down to, Matt, there are great examples out there of lots of Americans, particularly those who occupy positions of profound power and policymaking in the government, like Betsy DeVos or any other person you can name in the Trump administration or any administration before that, really. They're all phenomenally wealthy people, anyone in Congress or the Senate. I think what it fundamentally gets down to is that you have less time when you're poor. You have less time to live your life when you don't have the means to meet your basic subsistence. And I think that's fundamentally what it gets down to, where it's you don't have as much control over your life.
I think that's something you've talked about before too, is that when you don't have the money to spend, the only thing you really have to spend is your labor. And in that takes your time and your mental energy and your physical energy. And sometimes, or in a lot of cases, it makes your life shorter too. Mm-hmm. So not only do you not have the time to live your life, but the amount of work that you're doing makes it actually end faster. Yeah,
that's a great point too. And listeners, you're welcome to participate in this conversation. As a quick reminder, again, at 585-219-8889. This is Evidence of Design on 100.9 FM WXIR. We're talking about income and wealth inequality in the United States. We've only really talked about income inequality right now. And just to remind folks again, the lowest 20% of income earners in the United States, they take in 3.1% of all of the income, and the highest 20% of income earners take in 52% of all the income. There's a huge difference between there. And remember, if you turn on any media source ever, they're telling you that we're living in a booming economy right now with the lowest unemployment rates in 50 years, and we're just in a great economy. And it's really funny because like the month's job report came out yesterday, and so all these, or 2 days ago perhaps, all these news organizations were covering like the monthly employment statistics released by the federal government, and it was much lower than people anticipated. It was like a third of the jobs were created that people expected. So it was just much lower job reports, and people are saying, well, it's because of Trump's trade wars, and there's a lot of anxiety about the market and things like that. And the New York Times last night ran a headline that was like, economy might be shakier than most thought. And
what?
Matt, yeah. And Matt, we've talked about this extensively, maybe on air, but also off air, where it's like there's this horrible obscenity to the way that like the media or we as in everyday people talk about the economy when we think we know what we're talking about, when we're like, yeah, it's booming or GDP or whatever. And like it means absolutely nothing to the way people live their lives,
The way most people live their lives.
Sure.
I think that I don't have like a specific example to share, but over the past couple years, I feel like I'm just constantly overhearing people talking about how difficult it is just to get by these days. And I don't know if I've just started like picking up on that more or if that's a recent change, but my experience is that, no matter what people are saying the economy is doing on TV, it doesn't feel any different to me. It doesn't feel like it's affecting me or the people around me in any significant way.
Mm-hmm. And data will back that perception up, Matt, or that feeling that things are really tough nowadays, because if you look at the cost of essentially any good or service, education, housing, healthcare, food, legal services, et cetera, the cost of those goods and services has increased more than wages almost consistently over the past 40 years. So great, wages have risen. People are making slightly more money. The issue is that the cost of everything else has risen more than the amount of money that people make due to income. Significantly more so. Right. And education is a great example, and we've covered it extensively on the show before, where education has like dramatically increased, right? And so the cost of an education nowadays is, I don't want to throw out a number, but it's ridiculously more so than it was even 15 years ago, where you'd have to your income would have to drastically change to support the amount that you would have, spent on education.
I may not be remembering this correctly, but I think it was something to like income has increased like 17% and education has increased like 30 something. Don't take my word on those, but yeah. I think it was like there was a significant difference between the two.
Yeah, I'm not sure, and I wouldn't be surprised. I think it's even more so change than that, because the cost of education has just gone up so much. But we've only talked about income, and really quickly, I want to cite the wealth statistics, because this is really important too. Where income is the most common means of getting money, because Mary, you just used the term like we're selling our labor. We're selling our time in form of labor in return for a paycheck, and that's how most people make money in our capitalist economy. But there's a lot of people out there who have wealth, and wealth is essentially all the stuff that you own. Most commonly for the average American, that is simply your home and your car. And that's your wealth. And so, of course, your cars aren't, once you drive a car off a lot, it's not worth that much anymore. So cars aren't a huge means of wealth. And of course, if you sell your car, you don't have transportation typically. So it's not really the best indicator of wealth. Homes are typically a good one and an indicator of like the middle class lifestyle. So if you own a home, your housing prices rise over time, et cetera, and that's kind of your principal means of your asset ownership. However, there's so many other means of owning wealth, and this is really where inequality, the bedrock rising inequality, comes from in the United States today and for the past 40 years and around the world, where there are different means of financial ownership, whether it's just owning a business or principally like stocks, bonds, and assets. Other things like that if you have no idea what I'm talking about right now, it's probably because you're not a part of this system and it's not benefiting you. And so there are only a few people who probably know what I'm talking about. For example, according to the Federal Reserve in 2018, the top 10% of Americans, so the top 10 wealthiest Americans, owned 70% of the total household wealth in the United States. So top 10% of Americans owned 70% of the wealth. The bottom 50% of Americans owned basically no wealth at around 1%.
What?
So if a bunch of wealthy people sold all of their stuff, that's kind of what wealth is. You can turn it into liquid, whatever. They own a lot of stuff in the capitalist system.
Such as 9 yachts, you're saying?
Yeah, right. That's an example of wealth. Exactly. So, a yacht would be a great example, but principally, like, it's usually financial stuff too.
Stocks.
Yep. And so that's kind of the world that we're living in, right? Is that the top 10% of Americans own 70% of all of the wealth that's out there. And remember, the top 20% of income earners make 52% of all of the income. And so we're living in a pretty unequal time, and it's the most unequal our society has been in terms of economics since right before the Great Depression, which was known as like the Gilded Age. Think of the Great Gatsby and all of the robber barons of that time. So we're living in a pretty unequal time.
Is that just because we have the statistics to back it up now, though?
That's a great point. So, yeah, we're not living in like the most unequal time in human history. If we go back to like feudalism or whatever, and people just like
We're serfs.
We're serfs and peasants and indentured servants, or slaves, Right. So, and especially, absolutely, that's a great point for like, if you want to measure income and wealth inequality, African Americans didn't have any income or wealth for centuries in the United States because of slavery.
Or rights, I mean.
Right, yeah, just looking at economics, right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But I think that's important to throw in there,
Yeah, absolutely.
There's like a little bit more to that.
That's a great point. And, Mary, this is where everyone will come from the right? If you're like a conservative economist, you would say, well, look, human history has gotten so much better. Billions of people have gotten out of poverty. Millions of people have more rights. Incomes are rising. More people are moving into the middle class. And that is true. There's research out there that says, like, as a human species, we are, everyone's getting a little bit wealthier. But the problem with that idea, I think, is that it masks some really scary underlying things going on in the rhetoric, where it's like, yes, capitalism is allowing people not to live completely immiserated lives anymore. And it's like, that to me doesn't say that we're in the right spot or that we're going anywhere, because the problem is that the world that we're living in today fundamentally will not be the world that we live in 100 years from now. Because corporations, for example, could keep increasing power and taking away from governments, and thus we can go back to like a feudalistic, capitalistic society where essentially we're all just indentured servants again. Things like that.
I'm just thinking of the wording you used, where you're saying that people on the right are arguing that, look, it's better people are able to move into the middle class, and I'm focusing on that specifically because the argument that people can move into the middle class depends on people still being lower class and people still being upper class. Mm-hmm. Like, if you're using the rhetoric of middle class, it like automatically means that there need to be people who are not making very much money.
Yeah.
And there need to be people who are making a lot of money.
That's a great point. And so one on the left could argue that, like, okay, yeah, there's always going to be economic disparities, right? Some people will always make more money than others or have more stuff than others, and that's okay. But so long as the government can provide access to basic services like housing and healthcare and adequate education and transportation, then it's okay to have those disparities. But the problem with the society that we live in now is that the government is not providing those services, so that it's still sort of a free-for-all. Even if you're making slightly more money, you still don't have access to healthcare. Even people in the middle class are not having easy time getting and paying their medical bills, So the counter argument from the left would be like, well, let's introduce more socialist policies so that everyone could access to basic goods and services. And great, you can still have people who want to be wealthy and stuff, as long as I can live my life without fear of not having healthcare and things like that. That's a strong point. And so, listeners, again, we're talking about income and wealth inequality today on 100.9 FM WXIR. We'd love to hear from you throughout the hour. We're here live for you on this Saturday, June 8th. 585-219-8889. 585-219-8889. Mary is here to take your call.
Sure am. Running the board today for the second time ever.
Is ready to.
So hopefully you're getting good sound right now.
It's ready to give you a
not,
check.
call in and let me know.
And so there are so many other directions that we could take this conversation on inequality, such as policies from the government, the Tax Cuts and Job Act, ... So much more. I want to just cover two very small examples of things that I find to be problematic in our society due to economic inequality or due to an over-reliance on a capitalistic system.
Just small examples?
Small examples.
Oh, all right.
And one, folks might have seen reporting about this, Matt. We didn't get to cover this before when this came out, although we had it on our schedule. For example, this is a report from NPR on May 7th of this year, and it's titled H&R Block and TurboTax accused of obstructing access to free tax filing. Have you ever used TurboTax or H&R Block to file taxes before?
I used TurboTax for a few years, and I mean, I found it like pretty helpful, but that like frustrated sigh was thinking about their advertisements for filing taxes this year that were literally just like different people saying the word free over and over and over, and saying that like your tax filing is always going to be free, and that's such a lie. Like, you can file federal taxes for free, but they always make you pay for something. Like either your state taxes or if you have any special. Anyway, I have no idea how they were able to get away with advertising as free when it wasn't.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe the article goes into it.
Yeah, I've used TurboTax before, and I don't any longer. When I was using TurboTax, I even knew that TurboTax has for more than a decade essentially been one of the loudest lobbyists in Congress not to have Congress simplify the tax code, because TurboTax loves a complicated tax code because it means people have to use their service. If we actually lived in a society where doing your taxes was simple, or as Republicans love to say, like you can file it on a postcard, which you still can't after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, by the way. If we lived in a society where filing your taxes and the tax law was a lot simpler, you wouldn't need things like TurboTax. But wait, there's more. What if you could file taxes through an organization known as the Internal Revenue Service? The
IRS?
Yes, the IRS, the organization of the federal government that collects the income taxes.
The most hated organization in America.
Right.
Right after Planned Parenthood.
It depends which side you're coming from.
Yeah. Yes, unfortunately. And again, remember, we're talking about, we started in the hour talking about the importance of the federal income tax, not just so that we can have roads and bridges, but also because it allows us to measure the extent to which there's income inequality in the United States. That's another reason why the right doesn't like taxes like that, is because it makes transparent their holdings of wealth and income. So long story short, this reporting that's been out now about sort of, what's going on with TurboTax and H&R Block and these other institutions who are allegedly undermining free tax filing. Well, back in 2003, those tax prep companies formed what's known as the Free File Alliance, and they essentially agreed to offer free tax preparation to low-income Americans in exchange for the IRS promising that it would not get into the tax filing business in a free way. So the IRS basically said, okay, fine, we'll have a public-private partnership. The IRS will not offer its own free filing software. What it will instead do is refer people to other private companies to file their taxes. Great. Okay, public-private partnership, good or bad, who knows? The problem is that this reporting discovers is that these companies like TurboTax and H&R Block, they have a free file software for people to use, but they were masking it behind codes, so like coding, so that if you Googled like TurboTax free tax filing, you would be brought to the TurboTax website, and it would not link you to the actual free tax filing there. You would go through all of your tax preparation stuff, and at the end it would charge you like $90 for using their service, just because of the way that they trickily use like the Google search engine coding and other means to get people to think that they were actually filing their taxes for free until it actually charges them at the very end. And then, you spend 3 hours filing your taxes, you're at the very end of it, and you're like, oh, screw it, I'm just going to go ahead and pay the $90 of TurboTax anyways because I made it this far.
I have actually gotten to the end and realized that I was going to have to pay over $100 and gone back and done my taxes again from the beginning.
Yeah.
I cried. It was awful because it had taken me, a couple hours to begin with, and then I spent an entire day just doing that, just because there's no way to go back once you accept payment or accept the fact that you're going to pay or increase to the next level, quote unquote.
Yes.
You can't go back and undo it. You have to go all the way back to the beginning and start from scratch and re-enter every single thing you already did. And I did that once.
Yep. So you actually took the time to go back. And
I had it.
Yeah.
I mean, I had the time and I was able to, but not everyone does. And the only reason I did that was because I literally did not have the money to pay it.
Right. And so for a lot of low-income Americans, tax returns are huge. That's what allows you to get by and pay your bills. And so that's a huge deal. And if you have to pay a third of your tax return to TurboTax, that's a problem.
I think actually that was more than what my tax return was that year.
Yeah, right. And so here's more from the reporting. So get this. So ProPublica, who was working on this reporting, found that the tax prep companies like H&R Block and TurboTax used a range of tactics to lead low and moderate income people into paying to file their taxes, even though they technically qualified to file them for free. So I mentioned that these companies used bits of code to hide their free versions when people Googled them, so you wouldn't be brought to the website for their free versions. The only way you could find them is if you actually went to the IRS website and then linked to them from there.
That's good to know, actually.
Yeah, so always go to the IRS. Yeah, I can't give tax advice. It's a useful resource to check out the IRS website. But also, get this. This is incredible. So these products, for example, like TurboTax, purposely confusingly named their products. So they had a free edition of TurboTax, which actually charged people to file state tax returns.
Yeah, it's the one I've used before.
So the free edition of TurboTax actually charges you to file state tax returns, while the truly no-cost version of TurboTax is the Freedom Edition, and that's not even listed on its homepage, according to this reporting. It might have changed by now that this has come out. But,
slimy.
Yep.
Slimy business tactics.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just wondering, actually, what are the criteria for, you mentioned that they offer free services for people of certain income. Do you know what those criteria are? Or do you just have to find it?
No. The numbers are here very close. I just don't have the quite article opened up. But I'm sorry, I used to know the numbers. But if you kind of Google it, it'll come up all this stuff on TurboTax. It says only about 3% of taxpayers eligible for the free file are using it. So,
I mean, I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
I'm just curious as to whether that's income based or.
It is income based, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
Can I just say this is a great example of just the lies and hypocrisy that economists and Republicans spread when we talk about how capitalism is the greatest system ever. It drives competition, which in turn drives the quality of goods and services. And it's no, it's not. I mean, if you get to you can get to a point in a deregulated economy like ours where it's not about providing a good service or a good product, it's about maximizing profit, and that's what this is all designed to do. It's not looking out for people, it's just about making money.
Right.
It's just so scummy.
Yeah, absolutely, Matt.
It's a great word.
Scummy.
Yeah.
It's all pretty scummy.
Yeah, it makes me think of the bottom of the ocean where there's really creepy fish.
They just suck on rocks.
Yeah, but then those rocks that are covered in
we call those bottom feeders.
Wow, that's also a great word.
Metaphors are strong with this one. Mary, so according to ProPublica, TurboTax makes its free file available to anyone who earns less than $33,000 or qualifies for the Earned Income Tax Credit. H&R Block's free version comes with those making $66,000 or less, but only for those who are 50 years or younger. So about a little less than half of America is eligible for filing your taxes for free, thanks to federal law. But because these private companies are screwing the law, people are not able to do that. So that's just kind of one example. Oh, Jason, how does this tie into income and wealth inequality? Well, how you get to a place where the bottom 20% of Americans take in 3% of all the nation's income is because of, as Matt is saying, these scummy body and feeding practices that impact so many institutions in our life. So many more institutions, and we've covered plenty of them on the show, that each way you nickel and dime people out of their ability to make their ends meet. And the second example I was going to use, that's very short. Has anyone gone to a gas station and you're pumping your gas?
In the past, 5 years?
Yeah, in the past 5 years. This isn't that new. But you're pumping your gas, and then all of a sudden you hear a TV turn on, and you turn around, and the gas pump is has a TV screen on it.
I used to relish that time pumping gas because it's one of those few moments where it's just quiet and you're not talking to anybody, you're just sitting there holding your pump,
holding the nozzle,
But and then just commercials.
Yeah.
I can't say I have that experience very often.
That's true.
I know anyone who listens to the show frequently knows that I don't drive, but I have pumped gas in my lifetime a few times.
Maybe $10 5 years from now, when you go to fill up the air in your tire, there's going to be commercials that come on from the air pump that you use. $10
from the computer that's been implanted inside your head.
Right. Yeah. No. But that's just the most obscene example on so many levels of why do we need advertisements to play as we're pumping our gas?
Just bombarded all the time.
Yeah.
It's a fight for your attention.
Cell phones are bad enough, right? I'm constantly feeling the urge to check my cell phone.
Does anybody remember when YouTube didn't have ads?
Yeah.
I've actually recently, this is within the past week, I have started getting text message advertisements to my phone, and I don't know why, but it's definitely scam things, things saying you need to, update your Facebook profile, click this link, and it's as a text message, and I always delete them. But the other day I even got something that was are you looking for a job? Then click on this link and work for Amazon from home. And it, I don't know if that's something that you've been getting too, but this is it feels very, very invasive.
Yeah.
At least at the gas station, it's not pleasant, but it is still more of a public space, and this is coming right to something that's personal and that's my space, and I expect when my phone buzzes that it's going to be a friend, not Amazon telling me I can work from home.
Hey, you want a job?
Or Facebook. It's so weird.
That's a great point.
Did you guys see, this is a bit off topic, but did you guys see that Ajit Pai is supposedly talking about cracking down on robocalls?
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up. So this week there's been a lot of reporting on the FCC and members of Congress and the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, led by Ajit Pai, Matt, who you just referenced, who infamously repealed net neutrality, even though the vast majority of Americans, 90%, both Democrat and Republican, didn't want it repealed. But because, the government no longer represents the wishes of the people, instead the wishes of corporations like Comcast and all of that. Well, anyways, another example of income and wealth inequality. But yeah, so the FCC is now investigating sort of all these scam calls that are going on. I've been getting some in Chinese. People I get calls and I'm why?
Mine's always the apartment that you own is about to be raided by the FBI. I don't have an apartment.
Oh, I'm so glad that I own an apartment.
I'm not Paul Manafort. What do I have to care about? Yeah. Listeners, I'd like to also kind of go off topic, do a brief intermission and say once again thank you for tuning in to 100.9 FM WXIR. This is really important, I think, radio like this, because we are not owned by iHeartMedia, formerly known as Clear Channel, or anything else. Like, WXIR exists because there are good people in this community who dedicate their lives and time to make something like this possible. There's not a lot of money involved in this, and it really takes a lot of dedication, effort to get radio like this happening. People in your community that you see around town, on air, having these conversations. So thank you for tuning in, and I hope in some way, thank you for supporting WXIR in whatever way you do. I want to let folks know that something really exciting, if you haven't heard about it yet, is that WXIR, in collaboration with WAYO and Poder, will be hosting the Grassroots Radio Conference this year. That's October 4th through 6th, and it'll be held at various local places. But it's basically a giant conference to bring people together and talk about grassroots radio, which we could do an entire show on, just like we covered TurboTax, just like we covered scam calls. We could do an entire show on how the radio and media industry is becoming, it's already monopolized by giant mega corporations like iHeartMedia that buys essentially every radio station they can buy, homogenizes it, feeds you utter crap, frankly, like bad music and just sort of bad talk radio from or just sort of nonsense. It fills your head with essentially gas pump commercials. Yeah. Like gas pump commercials. That's kind of what like radio's become. And so this is really important, grassroots radio and other things like that. So check out the WXIR website, 1009wxir.com. Check it out. It's really cool stuff, and you're welcome to volunteer and participate and attend the conference. Just like you're welcome to participate in the show right now by giving us a ring at 585-219-8889. Mary, what's the number one more time?
585-219-8889.
Matt, give it a shot.
Matt's not looking at the sheet that has
219-8889, area code 585.
But you put the 585 first.
That's, yeah. Just in case you don't know how area codes work.
So, funny story about that, Matt, and sorry to put you on the spot, but I briefly volunteered at another local radio station for a while, and we were doing like a pledge drive, which is when you try to get people to support the station, which is really important, because that's how these stations make money and
because
stay
you
active.
care. You care to keep hearing this great content.
That's right. That's true. And so the co-host I was with was like, all right, Jason, give him the number one more time. And I had like completely blanked on the number, and there was no sheet or anything around that said the number. And I was just like, and it was like 5 seconds of just hearing me say UHHHHH, and it was quite embarrassing.
So
did they cover for you?
Yeah, he was eventually just like, well, call this one. And he like gave the number.
So you were like that was a good time. I'm gonna
quit.
Do that to somebody in the future.
And then got you back. No.
But at least this time there's a sheet to refer to.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say a story in which you gave Colors your personal number, because I know you've almost done that before.
Yeah, I think I have
times.
done it once. Yeah. Where every time I want to say the number, I think of my cell phone number, and maybe that's why I'm getting so many scam calls now in Chinese, is because we have.
Maybe they're listening to WXIR.
Yeah.
Hawaii. Or I don't know how it's pronounced.
Anyways, folks, let's freeform the last 10 minutes unless listeners give us a ring, 585-219-8889. I want to remind everyone about elections that are coming up. So those who've listened for a while know that we here at EOD love talking about elections.
We love talking about voting.
Voting is important. You know why? Because that's how you make change happen.
We finish each other's sentences.
So cute.
If you go for it, Matt.
I was just going to say, you might not think that there's any elections this year because it hasn't been talked about in the mainstream media, but there are some local and state level elections.
Yeah, there are. I'm just trying to
remember what they are because nobody's talking about them.
Don't know what they are, but go vote. No, yeah. So if you go to monroecounty.gov/elections, you'll see all the information you need for elections. So the primary elections that are coming up for state and local elections, the primary elections are the end of this month on June 25th. So polls are open very soon for that. I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe as long as you're registered with a political party in New York State, like Democrat or Republican, you can vote in the primary. I think only for those folks who are in your party. I could be wrong on that, but because I know that's what it is for federal at least. I don't know if that's true for local. But so June 29th, end of this year, that's when end of this month, that's when elections are. And Matt, you're right. There's a ton of offices open that will be on the ballot to be elected. So, for example, just for the city of Rochester, I believe we have every legislative district. We have county legislative districts 1 through 29. So there's 29 legislative districts that are open. There's also going to be 4 members of the Rochester City School District School Board that are on the ballot. There'll be 2 Rochester City Court judges, and there'll be also, I believe, 4 seats in the Rochester City Council. There's also larger positions open around the state. There's district attorney, the state Supreme Court, and also countywide, there's the county executive and the county court. So a whole bunch of stuff I just shouted out there. County legislative districts, county executive, school board, city council, a whole bunch of local things. If you're listening right now from the surrounding suburbs, essentially it looks like every surrounding suburb has like their supervisor, their clerk, their town justice, their town council members. All those folks are on the ballot. How do you learn more about local offices? That's a great question.
It's a great question.
Yeah, you kind of have to do your own digging. I know that the city newspaper, for example, has covered it. I know that the DNC has covered it a bit. I know that WXXI has covered it a bit. And I'm sure that other folks on this station have covered it as well. So you kind of have to do your own digging.
Maybe we should cover it.
Yeah, we probably should. That's what we're trying to do right now a little bit. Just to let folks know that primary elections for state and local positions are coming up at the end of June 25th. And so do what homework you can and vote for those folks who you think will make a difference, because your voting does really matter. It does count. The general election will be on November 5th of this year. Until we get into next year, when we have the presidential showdown, Godzilla versus King Kong.
Oh boy.
And we'll see what happens with
Who's
that.
who in that analogy?
We don't know yet.
Yeah, I think Trump is both.
Okay.
Godzilla
versus himself?
Yeah.
Yikes.
Yeah. And so, if we bring it back to this notion of income and wealth inequality, sort of talking about a slow decline in our society.
Slow?
Right. So a lot of folks wonder, to what extent do things like climate change matter? To what extent does any individual instance matter in a larger theme of existence? For example, are there moments or are there movements?
I mean, you can always say that, like, oh, well, what is my participation going to matter? But if it matters because we collectively decided to care about something, and if you do something, then hopefully it will inspire change in other people. If you don't do anything, then nothing's going to change, obviously.
Yeah.
We have to do as much as we're able to in order to fight for our future.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if there's any other way to communicate it without using cliches.
I think we just shifted gears pretty hard.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think our listeners are following where we're going with this?
Well, explain it, Mary. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
No, go for it. No, go with it. Yeah.
Speaking of putting people on the spot.
Yeah.
I mean, we started this show talking about money, really. We started talking about the economy and how income and wealth inequality is very disparate right now in the United States. And then we talked about elections and sort of what change we can make. So right now in the last few minutes, I think what we kind of want to go into is an example of how income and wealth inequality is a real problem in the world that we live in, considering climate change. Does that sound right?
Mary, that's great. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Wow. I feel like I know what we're talking about now.
I'm so glad. I guess, should we maybe think of some concrete examples of how climate change can affect people differently? Like thinking about people who don't have a lot of money versus people who do have a lot of wealth and money, how a changing planet might affect those people differently.
Yeah, a good example, earlier on I was talking about doing some research with some young people to talk about income and wealth inequality, and one of the questions I asked them is there any disadvantage to being rich or upper class? Is there any disadvantage to being rich or having being upper class? And one young person very eloquently said, it's worse for the climate. It's a disadvantage to the climate to be rich and upper class. And I found that fascinating.
Did they expand on that at all?
They said that richer places tend to hurt the planet more, and that was about it. But I thought that was very fascinating because I think if you look at the data and the wealthier nations contribute more CO2 and garbage to pollute the planet than poorer nations.
The example that came to my mind immediately was we talked about this a few months ago. Was that report that NPR released where they found that it was easier to apply for federal aid after a natural disaster if you were a wealthier individual than if you were poor.
I remember you talking about that one, yeah.
Yeah.
I just think that's what's going to happen. As the climate continues to worsen and as storms and natural disasters become more and more destructive, that the people who need help the most are just going to get left behind. There's going to be famines and starvation.
I guess we can even bring this back home to Rochester, because recently we've had a lot of issues with the lake flooding, and I know it's affected some businesses on the lakefront, and I'm sure it's affecting homes as well, and will continue to. And I guess we might think of people who own homes on the lakefront as probably being wealthy, but I guess we could bring it to that question of who is going to get the insurance break, who has their only home on the lake versus who has a second home on the lake, and how are they going to be able to cope with the damage that the water is making.
That's a great point. I think, as we look at all of these issues, as we look at climate change, as we look at income and wealth inequality, it affects people differently. It affects people spatially. It affects people on the realm of intersectionality. So it differs based upon your gender, upon your race, upon your relative disability, upon your age, and of course upon your class. And so as a society, we're going to have to wrestle with a lot of tough issues going forward, I think, big questions. That's why our introduction talks about that. It's Mark Zuckerberg saying, I think we as a society are going to have to wrestle with major issues. And I don't know if he actually believes in that, but I think that's true. And so it's a lot harder if we're living in unequal societies where people aren't voting and aren't getting involved or staying informed. So, or
aren't able to. I guess that's also something that we've covered on this on this show, is how people have barriers, especially how people of low income have barriers to voting and making their voices heard. Mm-hmm. So it really is something that hits everywhere.
Indeed. And we'll have to leave it there. Thanks for tuning in, folks, to 100.9 FM WXAR to listen to Evidence of Design. You can find us on YouTube. Search Evidence of Design episode and put a number in after that, and we'll come up for you, all right? Esquire Hour is up next. They put on a killer show. Thanks a lot for tuning in. Stay